Olá a todos, nós estamos aqui no Congresso da SOBRAC 2019 em Salvador e estamos aqui com um dos convidados internacionais, o Dr. Pasquale Santangeli, da Universidade da Pensilvânia, na Filadélfia. Uma das áreas de atuação muito importantes são as arritmias ventriculares e nos pacientes com cardiopatia isquêmica e não isquêmica. One of our talks is about the ICD EGMs in non-ischemic cardiomyopathy. What's your approach before doing a case of VT ablation? What do you check? The EKG, electrograms, imaging? What's your approach there at Pennsylvania?
Thank you. It's a very important question. I think for non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, for the dilated cardiomyopathies in general, we tend to try to understand where the substrate is, and it's quite important. So we over the years, we did learn that the substrate tends to distribute in two big categories. One is the so-called septal and monanterior, so the so-called anteroseptal, and the other one is the basolateral. And regardless of the type of cardiomyopathy, they tend to have these two major distributions in general, the majority of patients. And they have different procedural approach. Of course, if you have a septal substrate, you don't need to go epicardial because you have coronary vessels and fat. You have to be prepared to bail out strategies like bipolar ablation, simultaneous unipolar, half normal selling. So you need to know upfront what you're dealing with. And also in terms of risks, the septal substrate, you may end up having a pre-procedural heart block because you ablate the conduction system. If you have a lateral substrate, intralateral, most of the times is more extensive in the epicardium compared to the endocardium, so you want to know that upfront before going for the procedure. If you have to go for an epicardial procedure, we tend to do general anesthesia for all our patients. It's more safe, it's more controlled, and so we want to plan that. There are different ways of planning. First of all, knowing that VT morphology is quite important because septal VT morphologies are different in morphology from the infralateral, but you don't always have that. Most of the time you do have intracardiac electrograms from the VT episodes, from the ICD electrograms. And we did a study recently, and we looked at simply at the timing between the onset of the far field electrograms of VT, which is basically from the RV coil to the CAN, and that tells you the QRS of the VT, to the near field and the RV apex. And the idea is that if you have a septal VT, it takes much shorter time to get to from the onset of the QRS to the near field and the RV apex, as opposed to a lateral VT. So we distinguish these two, and I will give a talk about that. Of course, imaging is very important. It's not always feasible. We tend to do it in everybody because we can do MRIs in people with ICD, but throughout the world, you cannot do MRIs in patients with ICD, so it becomes an issue. And you've done a lot of work yourself with the imaging integration with MRI and CT scans. And one of the things that I think works fairly well is CT scans by looking at the late iodine enhancement and also at the local wall thinning. And there are two different companies that do that. So we've been doing that as well. Of course, not every patient you have time to do all of these investigations pre-procedure. The one that present with VT store, ideally you just have the VT morphology and you know what you're dealing with, so you can plan your procedure up front. And if you do not have the VT morphology, you have the ICD electrograms that can help you.
Okay. And another topic of you is about right ventricular cardiomyopathy. Do you think when doing ablation, we need to always go to epi, or there are some patients that you should go or should not go to epicardial?
Yes. Again, another great question. This topic is really quite dear to me. I like to ablate patients with heavy cardiomyopathy. So we did find that there is a subgroup that do not need epicardial access. In other words, they do not need it at the first procedure most of the times. And this group of patients is the ones that present a large endocardial scar. If you have a large endocardial scar, and if you look at the endocardial bipolar scar, I'm talking with a lot of late potentials and so on, usually with a single procedure, or repeat by just doing everything from the endocardium, you can avoid going to the epicardium to have even a relatively long-term success. And we have been using a marker of extension of the scar. Just we use the bipolar versus the unipolar. If the unipolar is much wider than the bipolar, it tends to indicate people that will respond better to epicardial, combined endoepicardial. But it really depends on that. And the reason why we always go to the endocardium first, because we don't know if there is endocardial scar, but also because if you do endoepicardial mapping and you ablate from the endocardium, in about 40% of the times you can eliminate potentials in the epicardium just with endocardial ablation because they're interconnected and the wall is very thin. So my inclination is always to go endocardial first. It doesn't take too long to do a voltage map that, so you can always go to the epicardium if necessary.
No, and you usually go on the same procedure.
We do the same procedure when needed, yes, and it's all driven by inducibility. If the patient is basically have a clinical VT, if it's still inducible for any VT really, then we go to the epicardium, or when we don't find any substrate in the endocardium.
And what are the thresholds for the unipolar map for the right ventricle? Is the same for the LV?
Yeah,
or
so
are different?
It's a little bit different because the ventricle is much thinner, so the amount of muscle is smaller. So if you use the same criteria for the LV, you tend to have, of course, less scar most of the time. So basically, what you find, we use 5.5 based on one study, 5.5 millivolts. That is lower than the classical 8.3 that we use in the left ventricle to detect far-field scar that can be epicardial near VC.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again for the invitation.
Bom, pessoal, obrigado pela atenção.